Hey, welcome back, y'all. So today's video, been seeing it with the ever increasing prices at the gas pump. Been seeing a lot more people filling up with E85 flex fuel, the yellow pumps. That they probably, obviously, all they're seeing is the price on the pump, and they're seeing it being way cheaper, and they're not considering all the other factors because they aren't educated. So today's video is going to be, as the title reads, is flex fuel right for you? And I've got some notes, and I'm going to change the camera angle and go over my notes so y'all can read them, just to give you some of the things that I've learned over the years with it since it first became prevalent years and years ago. And most of my experiences with performance style vehicles, either be supercharged, turbocharged, high compression, whatever, and whether or not you have that or you have your basic Chevy Silverado pickup or Ford F-150 that has flex fuel and you're just trying to save money at the pump. So with that being said, we'll get right to it. I'll change the camera up and we'll get started. Okay, all right, so some of the things we're going to go over, and not necessarily in this order. I'm going to talk about the cost versus the mile per gallon, some of the benefits of ethanol-based fuels, E85, whatnot, which would be, some of them are, the higher octane, it's cleaner burning and running, and it also has a cooling effect. Then I'm going to go over stoichiometry, mainly related to gasoline versus ethanol. We will also be going over the pump E85 ethanol percentages, because it's not always E85, and honestly rarely is it anymore. Talk about fuel consumption, which kind of goes back to the cost versus mile per gallon, and by the time I cover these, you'll see why the fuel consumption is the way it is. And then lastly, I'll go over the performance benefits, performance gains, which go along with the benefits, and then there are some drawbacks, which I will cover. So let's get started. I'm going to set this over here so I have my notes. All right, going over cost. This is the big one that I think most uneducated people are going to not realize. So if you look at the cost, E85 right now, based on the thumbnail that I took the other day when I was getting fuel, here is $2.99. Pretty much everywhere in Central Arkansas, it's $2.99 for E85. 87 is $4.49. If you do the math on that, that's E85 is 66.5% the cost of 87. So that goes back to that, hey, you've got a Chevy Silverado or a Ford F-150 that you're just trying to save money on gas. You run 87, normally you want to use the 85. It's about that percentage of the cost per gallon. Now let's say you have a performance vehicle, and this is where most people use the 85, is you're not just doing it for the cost, but it is a factor, and it's a better factor. It is that same $2.99, but premium is now $5.09. So it's now just 58.7% of the cost of premium. Cost alone for your premium, it's better to run E85 because the miles per dollar are much higher with the 85 versus premium at the moment, and it's actually the best it's ever. The differential is bigger than it's ever been in Arkansas. So let's just go over that. Again, your MPGs, you're going to get about 60 to 70% of what you would with pump, 87, 93, whatever. And I'll show you why that's the case shortly. But these are some averages I have with the two cars that I currently have running E85. With the Cobra on 93, it would see about 18 miles to the gallon. On 85, it gets about 12, which is about 66% of the gas mileage. But again, it's at 58% of the cost. So It's about 8% cheaper to run E85 just on cost alone. My STI, the best I can get is about 23, maybe 24 miles a gallon on 93, and it gets about 16 miles a gallon on E85. Again, slightly better than about 66% of the cost, or of the gas mileage. So it actually is more economical to run E85 in these types of cars that require a premium. But let's say you have a newer flex fuel based truck, gets about 20 miles of the gallon. You're only going to see about 13 miles of the gallon of E85, which it's getting really close to not even being worth it. And there are some other drawbacks to that I'll cover here shortly. So to understand why it is like it only gets about 60 to 70% of mileage, you have to know what stoichiometry is. So stoichiometry, you have the fire triangle. If you've ever dealt with chemistry or science, you need heat or ignition, air, and fuel. Cars run off based on stoichiometry. At lambda, which is, one lambda is you're right at your stoich. So AFR is air to fuel ratio. So for 100% gasoline, it's about 14.6 to 1 air to fuel. So 14.6 parts of air per 1 part of fuel is where it's the most efficient burn. E10, and I've got parentheses pump gas here because 95% or higher of the gasoline pumps out there today run E10. Its stoichiometry is 14.1 to 14.2 ish to 1 AFR. And that's goes back to like cars from the early 2000s and before. The tune for them would be set to 14.6 to 1 as the stoich. Modern cars, every modern car I've been in the computer of is around here because the predominance of 10% or so ethanol in the fuel across the nation. Moving up to some combinations. So if you take E50, for example, which is kind of the bottom of what they can classify it as flex fuel or E85 pump, its stoich is 11.94 to 1. And E65, which is unfortunately for me in Central Arkansas now pretty much about as high as you can get for pump E85, its stoich is 10.6 to 1. True E85 is about 9.85 to 1. So, quick math, true 85, 9.85 divided by, say, 14.2 would be 69% richer. Or not richer, it's 69%. So, it's only going to go 69% as far, basically. If it were 14.6, it'd be 67%, so even worse. So that is where you start to see why you only get in the 60 to 70% range on fuel mileage. Is because it just runs richer. It takes more ethanol to burn than gasoline. It's one of its benefits, but it's also a drawback. Again, talking about this pump E85, it could be anywhere from E50 to E90. Here in Central Arkansas, we used to have MAPCOs. While I was gone on my 3-month trip earlier this year, all the MAPCOs turned into KCs that don't sell E85. The MAPCOs actually used to have the best E85 around. It was usually E85 to E90. Unfortunately, now we only have like Circle K's and Come and Go's, and those are about E65 to E70 at best. So if you take your 11.94 to your 9.6 to 1, AFRs of E50 and E90. It's going to be somewhere in that range if you get pump E85. And again, that just goes back to it runs richer, it needs more. So we'll have that. One of the biggest benefits for a performance vehicle is the octane. E85 is roughly 105 octane. So it's still called it for, it's been called it for years, but poor man's race fuel. And you don't have to have E85 to get the benefit though. If you look at this graph, I just, my 3-year-old artistic abilities, up here you have 105 octane, down here you have 87 octane, and your E10, E30, E40, E50, E60, E70, and E85. This is not perfectly to scale, but it's not a linear curve of octane. About E40 to E50, it really starts, the octane and the ignition that you can get out of it really starts to ramp up. And about E50 to E60 somewhere, you're at about 85 to 90% of the octane benefit of E85. So like trying to squeeze out that little bit more, it doesn't really change a whole lot between those levels. That's been my experience. I've tuned all 3 generations of Coyotes on flex fuel, the Cobra, the STI, and consistently that's pretty much the case. It really doesn't, the bang for buck is not that great trying to squeeze out that E85. Now if you're talking about the race fuel ethanols like the C85, X85, and all that you can get from VP, by the drum, yeah, those are better, but pump E85, it doesn't really matter. And this will be the last piece of paper I put in front of you. So benefits, obviously octane, which I've discussed. You can run more timing, which equals more power. How much power? Well, typically with a vehicle, you're going to get between 7 and 25 degree or horsepower per degree. You can advance up to a certain point. For example, with the STI, when I'm running, I can run more boost and more timing, to the fact that it's making 70 or so horsepower more on E85 versus 93 octane. The Cobra, if I was running 93 on that, it would be right around the 630 wheel horsepower mark, and it's probably closer to 750 on ethanol. I can't wait to get on the dyno to prove that. There's a cooler burn with ethanol. It resists high heat knock. You aren't as affected by summer heat with that, and knock sensors don't pull timing on modern cars as nearly as much with the 85. In fact, the 85, usually if you got knocked being pulled, it's usually false. It runs cooler. The engine in general, they usually run cooler because of it, because ethanol burns cooler. Your IATs, your intake air temperatures, for forced induction engines, those are critical. Almost every forced induction car, you want to monitor those. And with ethanol, they're less meaningful, because I'll give you a couple examples for I'll just mainly talk about the Cobra. For the Cobra, the factory tune was set to pull, I think, about 120 start pulling timing, 120 degree IATs. It would start pulling timing, and I've got it set that it doesn't even look at pulling timing until after it gets above 150, which is the difference of, I can drive it in the car in the summer right now and it not pull timing, but if I was running pump gas, it would be continually pulling timing. So that's just a benefit. It runs cleaner. You get less carbon buildup in the engine, as far as on the valves and whatnot, and your exhaust, various different parts. You also get less sedimentation in your fuel system, because it tends to eat all that stuff up. That is also a downside, because if we go to some of the drawbacks, obviously you get less fuel mileage, which I've covered already. You have to do more frequent oil changes because I'll talk more about it, but it's hydrophilic, so it absorbs water. Well, it gets into your oil, and therefore water and oil don't mix. So you can more frequently have oil or water in your oil system, which is not good. Obviously more parts wear if you don't watch that. Fuel filters and other components. So especially if you have that case of that F-150 or that Chevy Silverado or whatever vehicle that you've never run this stuff before, but you're now thinking about running it because of the cost, understand that you will need to change your fuel filter not long after you start running it, because it's going to eat all that sediment in the fuel system, in the fuel tank that's in there. Trust me, it's in there. It's going to eat all that stuff up and run it up into your fuel filter, and your fuel filter is going to clog. So that's something you need to look at. Obviously, other components. It takes about 30 to 40% more fuel capacity to run E85. So your fuel system has to be able to provide that to the engine. If you take the fuel injectors, the fuel pumps, fuel lines, fuel rails, fuel pressure, all those things are important. Fuel is probably one of the most important things to the motor running, aside from oil. And if you can't provide enough, you don't need to run it. Now, again, if you're in that Chevy pickup or Ford pickup or whatever situation, it's probably plenty fine. But if you've got a performance vehicle, most people already know this, you need about 30 to 40% more capacity in your fuel system, so it costs more. In fact, the cost completely negates switching to E85 on a cost alone, because it'll take you years to make that back up. Again, ethanol is hydrophilic, means it absorbs water. So if you have a vehicle that you say it's a toy and you want to leave it sitting, well, you don't necessarily want to leave it sitting with E85 in the tank, especially in the human environment like we have here, because water will get in that fuel, and then you just have, half your tank is full of water, and you can get things like hydrolocked and stuff like that, and just it won't run, because if it's got too much water in the fuel, it's not going to burn. So anyway, I think I've covered everything. Bottom line is, you got to think about what kind of vehicle you have, and why you're doing it. If it's a performance vehicle, it's poor man's race fuel. So of course it's worth it, because you're not just doing it for cost savings, you're doing it for all the other benefits of performance. Of course, the cost is there. If you've got the regular vehicle that has the flex fuel emblem on it, and you just want to save money, well, yes, it is still cheaper at the moment, but you have to go back and think about all those other costs. How new is that vehicle? How long has it been running on regular fuel? You're going to have to replace some things probably, in like your fuel filter and whatnot, not long after you start using it. So anyway, these have been my thoughts. I've just noticed recently, because a lot of people are trying to save money at the pump because everything is more expensive. Fuel is more than twice what it was on election day, and I have proof of that. At least here, literally, it's over twice the cost. So you gotta save money where you can, and people see that fuel that's almost half the cost, and they want to run it, and they don't think about all the other things. There were people about a month ago that I saw lined up on the 85 pump, and I needed it because I was in the Cobra, and it's the only thing I can run in it right now, and it was empty. So I had to pray to the fuel gods that I could make it to the next station I knew was available at and get fuel. But that's beside the point. The people that were running it were in Yukons and pickups and stuff, and at the point in time I did the math, and it was like 75% of the cost, so they're actually spending more money to run it. You just got to do the math if that's what you want to do. You got a performance vehicle, again, like I said, it's basically free race fuel, and the main thing is you have the fuel system to support it. Anyway, that'll pretty much cover this one. This has been a long video, and I've been talking and nerding out on data, but I just figured I'd get it out there, and if you want to learn, you can learn. Until next time, I'll be back.